Centuries ago, in an ancient part of the world, there was a young man by the name of Bakar. Bakar was tall, and he had dark and inquisitive eyes. He often wore this beautiful cloak, one that had been given to him by his parents. It was the traditional dress of his family. They were astronomers, magi, what some might call people of wisdom. Now, prior to his birth, Bakar's parents searched the stars for a sign. They looked to the night sky, hoping for some word of hope to be etched there. And there were moments when Bakar's parents began to think, maybe this is the moment. Maybe this is the sign we have been looking for, only to realize that their deep yearning to see this promise fulfilled had skewed their perception. They'd been wrong. And every time they were wrong, there was such disappointment. Bakar grew up hearing those stories of hope, stories of great disappointment. But as he heard those stories, not only stories from his parents, but stories that had been passed on by his grandparents and their parents, Bakar began to find this yearning within his own life, this yearning to seek out some sign, some hopeful invitation. When Bakar turned 20 years old, in that year, both of his parents died. It greatly grieved his heart, and he was struggling with how to respond to their deaths. He often would go out and stare at the night sky, wondering if he would get a sign. And then one night, he noticed a new star in the west. At first, it did not look all that unusual. But then the second night and the third night, that star began to grow with its brilliance. And as he moved into the fourth day, he began to feel this growing excitement within him. Could it be the star that they had been waiting for? And then suddenly he found himself a bit tempered by his parents' mistakes. And so he waited until nightfall came. And he looked, and as the stars began to appear, the new star revealed itself. But this time, it was the brightest star in the sky. And Bakar knew at that moment what it meant. He knew, and he was so excited. And he knew others throughout the territory would have seen it as well. And so he needed to get ready to move on. He prepared to set out what was a 2-day journey to meet up with other magi that would be gathering, those that had seen this star at its rising. But before leaving, he went into his home and went to his bed, and there he pulled out a chest, a wooden chest that his father and mother had given to him, a chest that his grandparents had passed on to them. And he opened it up, and out of it he pulled a pearl of great value. He tucked it under his shawl, and then he went outside and fetched his animal, a beautiful and majestic camel. And then he went and got that magnificent, colorful cloak that his parents had given him, and he put it on, a sign to people that he was an astronomer. He was a magi looking to the sky for signs. He set out. And as he did, riding that camel, going back and forth, he began to think about others that would be gathering, that they too would be bringing gifts that their parents, their grandparents had passed on to them. They were bringing them as a gift to honor the one that the Hebrew people in the West called the Mashiach, the Messiah. As his mind was wandering, Bakar did not notice a man seated alongside the road. It was only his animal that noticed and hesitated and pulled back, and that movement shook Bakar out of his daydreaming, and he glanced down and he saw this man, so thin, so frail, with just a piece of torn cloth tied around his waist, no other clothing. The day was already cold, and the night was going to be even colder. There was a wind beginning to blow, and there was this initial feeling within Bakar just to pull his camel around, but the two men made eye contact, and Bakar could not ignore him. He got off the camel and approached the man. The man tried to smile, but he was so very weak. Bakar knew what he had to do. He went to his satchel where he always had food, and for such trips, he always packed more than he needed. He pulled some bread, some salted fish, and a date. He approached the man and gave him the food, and he was thrilled. As he began to eat it, his emotional state changed, but Bakar could see clearly that the man was still very cold. Before Bakar knew what he was doing, he was feeling his cloak and the thickness. Not only was he wearing that cloak, but underneath it he was wearing a shawl and 2 other layers. He began to take off the cloak that his parents had given him, realizing it was the only item that had the length to completely cover the man. It was hard. He was reluctant. It had been a gift. It was a sign of who he was. But as he laid it over the man's facial expression said everything. It was both shock and joy, and that was what allowed him to relinquish his grip upon it. He watched the man eat comfortably under the cloak for a few moments and then sat down next to him. They sat there for more than an hour without saying a word. And then Bakar, thinking that he needed to get on his way to meet with others that would be gathering a short distance away, he bowed to the man, got back on his camel and started riding. But it was getting late and he was getting tired. And so he finally found a wooded area where he was able to lay down and sleep. One last glance at the brilliant star in the sky allowed him to doze off. But when the sun broke, he was ready to go with his shawl over his shoulders and that gift, the pearl, tucked deep underneath his clothing. Bakar headed west. As he moved toward the area where the others were to meet, he was surprised to see no others dressed in the colorful outfits. He wondered, was he early? But as he began to look around, he noticed signs that they had been there. He started to ask around to people in the small community, have you seen astrologers? Have you seen them in their bright colors? And finally, one woman said yes. They left only a few hours ago. They were following a star. They were headed to a city they called Jerusalem. After resting a few moments, Bakar set out. It was a week's journey to Jerusalem. 5 days into it, though, as he was riding along in the morning, he came upon a family standing in the middle of the road, completely befuddled. They looked lost. They looked sad. They looked frightened. Bakar stopped and asked if he could help. And they began to explain that they were on their way home to the town of Emmaus when suddenly thieves had come out of the woods and taken their 2 donkeys. Everything they had were attached to those donkeys. Bakar felt for them. He slid off his camel and picked up the first child and placed it on his camel. He picked up the second child and put it also on his camel. He then took the camel by the reins and led the family toward Emmaus, which was not the direction of Jerusalem. It was about a 10-mile journey. It took most of the rest of the day, and when they finally arrived in Emmaus, darkness was upon them, and the family insisted that he spend the night with them. They shared a meal, and as they were sharing it, Bakar became aware that those 2 donkeys were these people's livelihoods. And as he laid out under the stars that night, not only did he feel the beckoning of that bright star, he felt another calling. And when he woke up the next morning, he went to his camel, pulled off the satchel, and walked the camel to the family, handing them the reins, bowing to them, and then leaving. The family was stunned, but Bakar knew it was the right thing to do. It was 2 days by foot to Jerusalem on the rocky terrain. When he finally got there, he began looking around to see if he noticed anyone that might be a part of his group. But no one whatsoever was there. In the midst of the crowds, he was certain he would see someone dressed in the brilliant colors, but no one. A day passed, a second day, a third day. As he looked to the sky, he noticed that the star was beginning to lose its brilliance. He wondered what next. When finally on the 5th day there in Jerusalem, he came upon a Roman centurion who said that he had taken a group of astronomers to Herod. And Herod had heard their story, and Herod had sent them to Bethlehem. Bethlehem, he thought. The next morning, he was up early, and Bakar was headed there. It was a full day's walk. When he arrived, he found the townspeople of Bethlehem scurrying around. They seemed frantic. They seemed concerned that something was going to happen. Word came to Bakar that Herod was sending soldiers to kill children, specifically boys, because Herod had heard that a king had been born. As Bakar listened closely, word on the street was that a family with a young boy had received visitors, magi from the east, and then, upon hearing of the danger, had set out for Egypt to be safe. Bakar didn't wait. He immediately left town, moving as fast as he could. A half day into his journey, as he came around a bend, he noticed in the ravine a man, badly beaten. Others were passing him by, trying to ignore him, but Bakar could not do it. He knelt down and took care of the man to the best of his ability, but he needed more care. Quickly, Bakar took some sticks, and some reeds and began to weave a mat. He put the man on it and began dragging him. What was a full day's walk to the town of Hebron. There he found an inn, and he took the injured man, in to see the innkeeper, asking if he could care for him. The innkeeper was reluctant. The man, when he had been robbed, had had everything taken from him. Who would pay for his care, the innkeeper asked. Bakar could feel underneath that large pearl of great value. And reluctantly, he reached under and pulled it out and asked the innkeeper, "Is this enough?" The innkeeper's eyes were suddenly as big as the pearl. "Oh, yes, he will get the finest care. I will bring doctors. I will bring whatever is necessary, and he can stay as long as he would like." And Bakar relinquished the pearl to the innkeeper. He bowed to him and turned around and left. There was a feeling, of happiness that he had helped. But at the same time, Bakar felt heartbroken, lost. He had no gift. He didn't even really know now what direction to go. He wandered the city of Hebron for 3 days, so disappointed, so sad. He had let down his family, his people. And finally, after 3 days, he turned his face to the east and began the long journey home with his head hung low. Some might think that that's the end of the story. It's not. For some 33 years later, in a town in the east, you would find an older man still looking to the stars for a sign, for some word of hope etched upon the night sky. And one day, a preacher came into that town and began telling people, including Bakar, about the Mashiach, who had had a holy birth and had visitors from the east. Upon hearing this, it grieved Bakar's soul. He had not been able to be there. But the preacher went on to say that the Mashiach had grown up and become a great teacher. He had taught about compassion. He demonstrated humble service and grace. The preacher then began to tell stories that the Mashiach had told. And among them was a story about how the Mashiach had turned to a group of people and said, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was lonely, and you comforted me. I was injured, and you took care of me. I was naked, and you clothed me. And the people said to the Mashiach, where did we see you in such a predicament? And the Mashiach said to them, as you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. And as Bakar heard those words, the tears flowed down his cheeks, tears of joy. For Bakar, the name means I search, had thought that his searching had ended with nothing. He thought that he had failed his family and his ancestors and himself. But in those words, he realized that he had not delivered one gift, but many gifts to the Mashiach without realizing it. And when Bakar went that night to sleep under the stars, before falling asleep, he noticed that for the first time in 33 years, his heart was at peace.